Welcome, one and all. My name is Greg Manship. I am the manager of the Human Subject Protection Program within Research Administration here at OSF HealthCare, and delighted to be with you today. Stephanie Madrigal, Director of Research Administration, is going to be working with me through this presentation, so we are glad to work together. We're glad to have you here with us. The speaker after lunch. I don't even know how to take that, probably personally. So in order to make sure that I don't lose you right away, how about a couple of jokes? No. Well, thank you. Okay. So I have a few bar jokes. Bar jokes always go over well, so a couple of bar jokes. So three guys walk into a bar, the other one ducks. This could be tough. Okay, so I'm a pastor, so I can tell this joke, and if I offend anybody, that's you decide on that. But a priest and a preacher and a rabbi walk into a bar, and somebody looks up and says, "What, is this a joke?" Really? I saved the best one for last. So a horse walks into the bar, and the bartender says, "Why the long face?" So in conclusion, I just want to thank you for being here and move on. So at your table, everyone has a couple of documents. So I want to talk through the documents very quickly because the documents are going to play a large role in the presentation. So one of the documents that you have, may I borrow? So one of the documents you have, and of course I'm depending on you to have vision, so you can see this one, but it's a partial page, one side. This comes from the key information or concise information section from one of our current RECOVER protocols, the informed consent form for one of the RECOVER studies. I've tried to redact a little bit so that we're not pointing fingers at anybody, but this comes from the concise or key information section from the informed consent form of one of our RECOVER studies. For those of you who may not be familiar with the RECOVER protocols, the RECOVER protocols are NIH-funded studies that are taking a look at long COVID. Now, NIH is an agency within the Health and Human Services department, which means that NIH is a signatory to what is called the Common Rule. In other words, the NIH and other agencies within the NIH have agreed to abide by the federal regulations, 45 CFR 46, with regards to having a concise or key information section in the informed consent form. I should have saved the jokes until now. But anyway, in case you're still awake, this is what this is. This is the key information or concise information from a RECOVER informed consent form. The other document, did you all get one? I'm going to hold on to that. You should have, the table should have a very long one. Do your tables have one that's, there it is right there. So on your tables, you should have a multi-page stapled. Now, this comes from a protocol from the National Cancer Institute. And the National Cancer Institute is also within NIH, which means it must have a concise or key information section in its informed consent form. Here's what's interesting. If you take a look at this form, you'll see overview and key information. For those of you who have had a chance to see it, it's there. You have to trust me. And what's even more interesting is that after that subheading or after that main heading, there are no other main headings. In other words, all pages are the concise information, all 18 some odd pages. Why am I bringing this up? Well, I'm going to return that question with a question to you. In your experience, whether you have been a research participant or whether you have been a research coordinator or nurse or administrator, what's the longest informed consent form you've ever seen? How many pages? 40. Can anybody top 40? Top 40. I've had too much coffee. Okay. Anybody? 40, is that the top? So I'm curious now, what was the study population for a 40-page informed consent form? What's that? Which is, okay, adults, children, adolescents, adults. Okay, so 40 is pretty good. I have recently read a 43-page that actually involves children. Guess what the national, so someone's done the research, you can go look it up. Guess what, for adults, guess what the number of pages is that they can read without losing interest? Excellent. The research demonstrates that an adult, get this, an adult, normal adult, who wants to define normal? A normal adult will read 4 pages, 5 tops, before losing interest. We want cancer patients to read anywhere from 30, 25, I think the average is somewhere between 25 and 28, 25 to 28 pages of a protocol. We want children and their parents or guardians to read a 43-page informed consent form. The question is, what is wrong with this picture? Today, we're going to spend some time looking at the FDA trying to answer that question. What is wrong with how we're approaching informed consent? How can we improve it? And we're going to take a look at some, actually it's a proposed rule. The FDA has actually proposed a rule to change how informed consent is done, conducted, and how the informed consent form itself should be formatted, content, organization, and even language. We've already heard this morning talk about jargon and language. These documents are in front of you, and I encourage you to pass them around the table as we're talking. I think it will certainly illustrate many of the points we're going to make. And there is one third document, not a third of a document, a third document, that is actually from the recently published FDA guidance on this topic. And this is what's considered, this is a hypothetical. So this is their hypothetical key information section. So you'll notice it's a little different. It's 1 page, front and back, and it has bubbles. And we're going to be speaking to those bubbles as we go through our presentation. So that outlines the materials that are in front of you. I encourage you to engage, look at them, touch them, become familiar with them. They'll be part and parcel of what we're doing. Also, before we begin, I'm going to be looking to you for a remarkable amount of interaction. And we're going to be doing polling. So for those of you who are familiar with Poll Everywhere or something like that, lots of opportunities for you to share your thoughts, your concerns, your constructive criticism. And just want to alert you to that. So when we come up against that slide on the table, in fact, we can go ahead and bypass the slide. On the table, you should see a printout that looks like this. It's a QR code, and then it has a URL, pollev.com with the rest of the URL. Everyone should have one at your table. If you want to go ahead and use your camera and scan that QR code and queue up, QR code, queue up. Seriously, people, what? Okay. And then we'll be ready to go once we get to the slides. All right, so I guess I'm in control of my slides. So coming over here, I do have no financial interest to disclose. I just received a notification that I owe taxes on my mother's estate. So trust me, I have no finances except to pay that. So here are the objectives today. Recent research demonstrates that 99.9% of us in this room are literate, which means I'm not going to read the slides for the most part. These are the objectives. We're going to explain the value of identifying and formatting the key information. We're going to look at the elements of key information. And then we're actually going to analyze some of the informed consent or some of the key information examples, and that's what's already on your table. All right, so here's your first opportunity. Whoa, Greg forgot to clear the responses. Can we, or somebody already doing that? Oh, we'll just say you're already doing that. So thank you for thinking ahead. I appreciate that. But here, first question, please type in what are your respective roles, who's represented here, and what are your responsibilities in the conduct of clinical trials, human subjects research. Just take a moment and let's fill in the word cloud, if you don't mind, please. Thank you very much for participating. This is good. I appreciate it. Oh, while you're doing that, this is supposed to be a workshop. For those of you that have gone to conferences, they like to kind of categorize. So you have didactics, which are formal lectures being given by subject matter experts. And then we have workshops where everybody should be engaged and contribute, and we learn from each other. So that's the intent here, is for this to be a workshop. There's plenty of information to share, but I'm looking forward to us engaging and learning from each other as we go. So thank you very much. And I'm carrying around my mocha because I'm in withdrawal, so it helps me. You guys aren't going to laugh at anything. I don't understand this. So as you think about your roles, thank you very much for helping build out the cloud. By the way, I want you to know that you do have the option to make your responses anonymous. So take advantage of that if you want to be careful. But B, I also want you to know that we're going to retain your responses because this is part of our learning to better equip and empower you in your learning. So the answers will be captured, and we'll be using that for future presentations and training and education opportunities. So thank you very much for that. So here we go. This question, first opportunity for you to give your opinion. You have 5 options up here. What is your most important responsibility in the conduct of human subject research? And so far, we're shooting 100%. Oh, wait, Greg wasn't paying any attention. All right, so we have a couple of different categories. Third category. Does it keep changing? Nope. Looks like it's pretty stable now. All right, since it's stable, anyone want to take a guess? Which one's right? And you know what's going to happen? It's going to be the 3 people who said that. You go, well, I'm right. And I say, okay, well, that's not going to get us anywhere. So since I'm the one who's speaking, I'm going to say what's right. How's that? What is most important? And the answer is protecting the rights, safety, and of research subjects. You're absolutely right. So 92% of you got it right, or so. The rest of you, I don't know what you're thinking. Sorry, that was probably mean. Let me restate that. I don't know what you're thinking. This is the most important job. One could argue, no, it's data integrity. No, because if you don't protect the participants that have willingly given their consent, where are you going to get the data? So the argument that we will make here is that our most important responsibility is to protect the rights, welfare, and research subjects. We do that through the process of informed consent. It's a process, it's a conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. The Office for Human Research Protections and the FDA make it very clear that the informed consent process begins when? For those of us who do this on a regular basis, when does informed consent process begin? Begins with an R, E, C. Thank you, recruitment. Why? Why does informed consent begin at recruitment? I thought it began once you had somebody at the bedside or when somebody was at the clinic. Why does it begin with recruitment? What is recruitment? Exactly. For those of you who didn't hear it, what I heard was it's what you're telling the prospective participants. This is why you might be interested, and you have to tell them about the study. You're informing them, and so therefore recruitment is what begins the informed consent process. That process continues until after You have signed the informed consent form, and once you've signed the informed consent form, then your responsibility is complete, right? You don't ever have to say another word to your participant, right? You can say no, it's okay, or you could say yes, and that would be okay too. Which is it? Are we finished? Once they sign the form, we file it, we're done, right? We've done our due diligence, we have informed consent, right? No, of course not. Why not? Why does informed consent continue beyond the signing of a form? Why? Okay, they have the option to withdraw. Once they've put their name on a sheet, they can say, I'm finished. Here's the follow-up question. How would they know if they want to withdraw? Because we keep them informed. We tell them. So, it's a process that begins with recruitment. It ends at study completion. Once the participant is completely off the protocol, do you have any responsibility to convey any additional information about the study to that participant? You chew on that one. We'll come back to that. Informed consent, more than a document. It's information in a form of communication that promotes facilitation of understanding. ICF, more than a document. Information in a form of communication that promotes facilitation of understanding and decision making. And that is where we're going today. So the federal government has had an eye on informed consent, a close eye, a focused eye on informed consent for the last 10 years. This is just to give you some highlights as to what's been going on in the regulatory world. So in July of 14, the FDA put out some draft guidance on informed consent. That was the first time that's been modified since 1998. Then in January of 2019, OHARP, or the Office for Human Research Protections within HHS, they promulgated and began enforcing a revision to the Common Rule, or 45 CFR 46, which is the first update since 1991. Are you starting to see a picture? We had become a little used to how things used to be done. And there was a growing body of knowledge and literature that demonstrated we need to be updating ourselves. We need to be more effective at how we're protecting the rights and welfare of participants. Then in September of 2022, the FDA proposed rulemaking to harmonize the FDA regulations with OHARP. So when OHARP published their update to the Common Rule and changed some things about informed consent, including this key information section, there was hey, we really need to harmonize that with the FDA because there's a number of studies that are under the regulatory framework of both the FDA and OHARP, so we really need to have some harmonization there. The Cures Act, for those of you who are really big into regulations, the Cures Act mandated that harmonization happen. So in September of 22, the FDA proposed rulemaking to harmonize the FDA regulations with regard to harmonize with OHARP. In August of 23, the FDA published its final guidance on informed consent. Show of hands, how many people have seen that? Okay, good. I mean, not good. I mean, well, I'll keep your interest. How's that? And then in March, this past March, the FDA draft guidance, which is what we're talking about today, was published. Here's what's interesting about this draft guidance. In the draft guidance, for those of you who download it and read it, what you're going to learn is this. And this guidance is intended to support or supplement the proposed rulemaking that was proposed in September of 22. The caveat is that that rule may not be published as it's written. If it's not published as written, then the FDA is going to have to use guidance such as this to fill in the blanks that would be left if the proposed rule is not published. With all of that going on, bottom line, things are going to change. things are going to change with regards to informed consent, and we need to be ready, and we need to be responsive to not only the guidance or the mandate as it comes out, but we need to be more responsive to our prospective participants' needs. Another question for you. What do you think is the average reading level for an adult? Average. What grade? I have 5th grade. Do I hear another? 5th grade. Higher. I hear an 8th grade. 8, I have 8. Do I have 9, 9, 9, going 9, 9, 10? 5th grade. Used to be that we were encouraged to write it at the 8th grade level. Literature demonstrates that that is too high for the average American. There's probably commentary to that. I'm going to leave that alone for now. But all of this to be said, changes are coming, and this guidance is intended to help us with that. So, next question. From your perspective, what is driving the FDA focus on the change of informed consent? What are some of the dynamics? Sorry, I laughed at lawsuits. What do you think is driving the FDA focus on changing requirements for informed consent? And thank you for engaging. Appreciate it. All right. So we're starting to see a picture here. There's obviously some legal concerns, lawsuits, malpractice. There's some safety concerns. We do have complaints. I mean, come on. Why would a prospective participant complain about a 30-page informed consent form? With all of this said, and thank you very much for this, you've hit pretty much the biggies. The FDA has now placed its focus on informed consent. What's their guidance? So the guidance has 2 emphases: the key information section and please note, how informed consent process is to facilitate understanding. It's not limited just to the printed form. The proposed rule and the accompanying guidance directs how the process is to facilitate understanding. With that said, key information overview. The informed consent form, the actual printed form, or whether paper or electronic, don't get carried away with which or which, but the ICF, the form itself, is to begin with a concise and focused presentation. This is identical language to what's already in the regulations at 45 CFR 46, identical. So the proposed rule is going to just use the same information that's already out there. This is where it gets interesting, because according to the FDA guidance, it's supposed to be relatively short. Relatively short is a relative term. I'm going to quit trying with you people. It just doesn't work. Take a look at the one from the Recover. That's relatively short. A couple of sentences, some bullet points. Take a look at the one from the NCI-CIRB protocol, the NCI protocol. Multiple pages. I'm pretty sure that does not fall under the rubric of a few pages. In fact, the FDA guidance as printed said it should be no more than 4, which applies to the research that's already out there that demonstrates that an adult will read 4 to 5 pages before losing interest. So therefore, it makes sense that the FDA is incorporating that into its guidance. This guidance and the rule will be applicable to all FDA-regulated research. So whether it's a drug, a device, a biologic, it's also going to be applicable, and you'll see there at the end of the slide, to some of the more what would be considered extraordinary informed consent situations. So using a short form, emergency, and expanded access. All of these will be expected, if the rule passes, will be expected to have key information. And, always add an and be written and presented in a way to facilitate understanding. So this is my attempt to summarize the content. Left-hand column in maroon or burgundy, depending on your taste in wine. Basic elements. These are the basic elements that are in the current regulations with regards. This is what the FDA requires with regards to the informed consent form. That's column on the left. The middle column is what the FDA terms additional elements. These elements probably should be there, depending on the particulars of the study. The column on the right are the content or the topics that are addressed in the key information guidance, the key information new rule that's been proposed. If you'll notice, just very quickly, many of these topics come from the required or the basic elements. That very first one at the top, voluntary participation, right to discontinue or withdraw, that's kind of a combination of those topics seen in both the basic and the additional. And then down here at the bottom, not because it's less important, is costs, which comes to us from the additional. So the right-hand column are the topics that the FDA is proposing should comprise the key information section. Again, if you're taking a look at the examples that are in front of you, especially if you take a look at the multi-page, the one that's from the National Cancer Institute, you can begin looking at that and think, where in the world is that? Well, where in the world it is, it's all intermingled. So that should facilitate understanding. The one from the Recover, not all of those apply to this particular study. So maybe this is a little bit better. The example that is the hypothetical, there you begin to see how the FDA is envisioning how this information should be formatted. Now, here's how the rest of our presentation is going to work. We're going to go through each of these content sections, not in great detail, but we're going to go through them so that, again, it's a way for us to become familiar. This is the coming expectation. We need to prepare ourselves to see this and to incorporate this into our informed consent processes. So the best way to do that is for us to interact with the content. For each content section, I'm going to begin with this slide. And I'm going to ask all of you to participate, which is, so if this is the topic heading, voluntary participation and withdrawal, why does that need to be in key information? In other words, why is that important? And then the second question is, what do you think that would look like? What are some key or important words that you think should show up in that section? Once you've had an opportunity to fill in, I'll go to the next slide, and then the slide that follows will actually be bullet points of the content expectation. But I'd like to know from you first, what do you think would be involved in voluntary participation withdrawal? What do you think should be there? So go ahead, please type in a few things. Good, good, good. Thank you. Keep them coming. Excellent, excellent. Okay, great. All right, please continue. For the purposes of time, I want to make sure that I get through all of this, so I'm going to move on. Like I said, we're capturing these, so if there's an opportunity for us to do questions and answers, if you want to see these slides, see the results, we can certainly share that with you. But here's what the FDA is going to require. First of all, it's absolutely mandatory. You have to tell prospective participants that it's voluntary. Question for you. This is extra credit. Let's see, what can I give for extra credit? Chocolate kiss, which you already have on your tables, so I guess that's not much. Which historical event contributed to the requirement that prospective research participants must give their voluntary consent before they are subjected to experimental activities. Before that, I have a Tuskegee, but it's before that. Nuremberg, the Nazi doctors. The Nazi doctors were notorious for taking prisoners, people who engaged in other sexual behaviors. Other is up for definition. Different races, different ethnicities. Gypsies were a primary target for them, and subjecting them to horrific and heinous experiments. Putting them in pressure chambers and watching them explode. Injecting phenol directly into their hearts. Electrocution, dismemberment, and trying to stitch it back together. All of this is documented in the Nuremberg trials. But here's what no one really likes to talk about. And that is the same, not identical, but similar atrocities were happening in the United States at the same time. And for those of you who are not familiar with U.S. bioethics history, find and read the article that was written by Beecher. Beecher documents 21 or 22 similar atrocities in the United States. But all of that to say, history has taught us a lesson, and that is that we will not subject a person to experimental activities until they have given their voluntary consent. That's mandatory. Some of the other things they expect here, a decision not to participate or withdrawal should have no penalty. There should be no negative effects of someone saying, no, I don't want to do this, or once they've said I do, I'm out. And then there ought to be no adverse effects on the relationship between the participant and the investigative team if the investigative team happens to represent where they receive health care. And then anything else, you've already put some things in the slide, so I appreciate that. Moving on. This next section is considered or called purpose, people, period, and procedures. So purpose, I will just go through this. Purpose, what's the purpose of the study? People, who would be involved in the study? So like, what's the study population? Period, what's the duration? What's the expectation on my time? And procedures, what's going to happen to me? Why should that be key information? Why should that be necessary to tell a prospective participant? Let me know what you think, please. What do you think about this polling stuff? Do you like it? Do you like engaging like this? I like it because it helps my ego because you guys aren't falling asleep. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So I see that we have If, which apparently is Imaginary Friends, which is a movie that's soon to come out to theaters nearby. Little promotion. Excellent. Splendid. All right. Thank you very much for your participation. So purpose, people, period, and procedures is considered by the FDA to be key information that must be presented up front. Here's what the FDA has to say. Purpose, just a simple description of what the study attempts to learn. Question, how do you define simple? Who's responsible for defining simple? All right, well, chew on that one. People, population, prospective subject. You know, a simple description of, you know, why are you inviting this person? What does this person need to know that you see in him or her that now brings you to the point where you're saying, I invite you to be involved in a study. I invite you to expose your private information. I invite you to expose your well-being. I invite you to trust your health into our hands. What do they need to know? What's the duration of participation? The FDA even recommends that the key information include number of visits and the amount of time that's anticipated per visit, and you calculate that and you give them a number. Now, can you do that every single time? For those of you who have conducted clinical trials, can you do that every time with precision? I hope your answer is no. I mean, there are too many variables. You don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know what complications they bring in. But the point is that the key information, you're giving them a ballpark. You're giving them enough information to make an informed decision. I'm willing to commit this amount of time to be in this study. And then the procedures. High-level description of procedures. Again, what does high-level description mean? So, not clear-cut, but the FDA fully recognizes that. They're simply saying that key information must include enough information about the procedure so that a prospective participant can say, look, I know I have an understanding of what the risks are. I understand what may or may not happen. I understand that this is not intended to cure me. I'm good with that. I'll sign. Moving on. Reasonably foreseeable risks and discomforts. Another topic in the key information. Why? Why do prospective participants need to know or have some understanding of reasonably foreseeable risks and discomforts? Please type in your answers now. No one's seen that show. Okay, informed decision. Thank you. Make the best decision. Thank you. Yeah, see if they're even willing to enroll and stay on the trial. Absolutely. To be prepared. So signing an informed consent form is joining the Scouts. Okay, I quit. You guys just... It's funny what I think about it. All right, so reasonably foreseeable risk and discomforts. Question, who gets to define what's reasonable? What does reasonably foreseeable mean? I mean, is that epistemic certainty for those of you who are more philosophically oriented, which means there's absolutely no doubt this is going to happen? Is it 90%, 80%, 50%, 49.3%? What's reasonably foreseeable? How would we know? Clinical research professionals, tell me, how would you even begin to write this section? What is considered to be reasonably foreseeable? How would you know? What information would you have that would give you an opportunity to answer that? What do we know? Okay, so we're going to know from the literature. Sure. Yep. What else are we going to know? I am not signing up for a study here. Come on, talk with me. What information would you have at hand to help a prospective participant know what the reasonably foreseeable risks are? Certainly literature. You're going to have an investigator brochure. You're going to have a document that's going to tell you pretty much all you need to know about the investigational product, including risks. All right, so we're well on our way. Reasonably foreseeable risks and discomforts. The FDA recommends that this be on the very first page. So if you're going to have a key information section that's going to go beyond one page, this should be right up front. Why? Why do you suppose the FDA is saying key risks, foreseeable risks, and discomforts ought to be up front no matter what? Why? Okay, so we have potential harms. Now, let me ask you this. Oh, I'm sorry, there was another one. What was the other one? Yes, that's true. That's true. Right at the very beginning. I mean, they haven't worn out after 3 or 4 pages yet. And so we're telling them right up front, these are the potential risks. Why? Because of the possibility of harms. Why is that important to somebody? How in the world does someone knowing how this could possibly hurt them or make them uncomfortable inform their decision about wanting to be in a research study? Tell me. Exactly right. Follow-up question, April, since I know you. Follow-up question for everybody. Is every person the same? No. So, Swati may come in and say, I've read the risks, I understand them, I'm signing on. This is great. All right? Greg may come in, have a totally different set of values, a totally different set of life circumstances, and read the very same document and hear the very same words, but based on my current circumstances, I could say what? Heck no. So, next section, reasonably expected benefit. Why? Why do we need to tell prospective participants about reasonably expected benefits? Let me know what you think. Ah, that's a good one. This is good. All right. Good. Okay. Good. What's in it for me? Yes. My favorite radio station, WIIFM. All right. So, why reasonably expected benefit? Well, first and foremost, it might actually be an incentive. Maybe it's a very difficult study. Maybe it's a small study population. You need to encourage people who would be eligible to want to sign up, right? I mean, let's just be honest. Sometimes you need to incentivize enrollment. You do. So how do you do that? Well, the IRB is not going to allow you to offer them $1,000. The IRB is not going to allow you to offer to pay off their house. But the IRB certainly will allow you to provide some kind of compensation that is commensurate with time and effort or risk. They certainly will allow you to reimburse with receipts and whatnot. But here's a follow-up question, and this is a tricky one. Is compensation or incentive generally, is compensation or incentive considered a benefit? Uh-oh, I heard an answer. No. Ladies and gentlemen, please do me a favor. Please stop writing your informed consent forms, and please talk to the sponsors when they send stuff to you that has that compensation or reimbursement is a benefit. It is not. The benefit is what the participant may experience by virtue of being exposed to or receiving the interventions of the actual research protocol, not what they get paid. And that, my friends, is in the regulations. All right. There it is at the top. Compensation reimbursement is not a benefit. I was right. Of course, I wrote the slide, so I'm going to be right. There needs to be an unequivocal, unambiguous statement when the study intends no potential or direct benefit. Why? Why do you need to tell a potential participant, that this study will have and is intended not to have any direct benefit to you? Why? Or do you go ahead and tell them that anyway, just so they'll enroll, so you can keep your numbers up? And you know what? Nobody said, no, I don't do that. Why? Come on. Help me understand that you understand. All right, well, think about it. Unequivocal, unambiguous statement that research is not individualized care. Now, I understand For those of us who are in cancer research, we don't like to talk about this because as far as we're concerned, cancer research is treatment. I'm not denying that. That's not what I'm arguing. What I'm arguing is that research, by definition, is experimental, and experimental, by definition, is generalizable. By definition means it's not individual. Therefore, it must be made explicitly and clearly stated that research is not individualized care. To do otherwise is to make the mistake of what's called the therapeutic misconception, which is to convey information about research in such a way that the potential participants construes that as being individualized curative care. And that's an ethical misstep. If there is any potential benefit, then the explanation of any potential effect on subjects' health and conditions must be understood. So for example, the investigational product, like you see up there, may be intended to reduce the tumor size. But it must be explicitly stated that even if it does, we don't know what kind of an effect that's going to have on your life, on your well-being. We don't even know what's going to happen. All right, moving on. Appropriate alternative procedures is another topic. Why should this be key information? Why would a potential participant want to know that there are alternatives to the research? Options, yes. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I'm truly grateful that you all are taking time to do this. Thank you for engaging this way. Ah, that's a good one. They're not stuck, yes. Excellent, all right. Again, for time, please keep typing if you wish. Moving on, what the FDA has to say about this. Clear and concise description of alternative procedures. You know, what else is available? The study, this particular study is not your only option to access healthcare system. Again, description of reasonably foreseeable risks and benefits. And note here, this particular bullet, this last bullet, information not in key information should be included elsewhere. So in other words, depending on the study population or potential population, you may make the decision, the sponsor may make the decision that appropriate alternative procedures, you can't put all that information in this key information section. It should show up elsewhere in the main informed consent form, and the FDA recommends that you cross-reference. So use a page number. If it's electronic, use bookmark technology to be able to move over to the other section. But the rest of the information ought to be included and should be cross-referenced in the document. Injury compensation and treatment information. Again, why? Why does a potential participant want to know if there's going to be any compensation if I'm injured? Yep. Okay. Money, money, money. Treatment options if things go wrong. Okay, legal issues. Yes, of course. So they can trust. Okay, maybe I've been reading them too fast, but for those of you, this is the first time I've seen trust up here. So another bonus question. Generally speaking, what do you think the current public attitude is towards healthcare generally and healthcare research more specifically? Poor. We have a trust issue. And given the fact that since the middle of 2020, over 300 articles published on COVID research have been retracted because they have found to be crap. And that's a technical term, by the way, in publications. Do you see why the general public is going to look at us and say, okay, you have fancy new buildings, you have fancy new promotions, you have fancy new people, but yet you want me to put my body in this big machine and you can't even tell me that it's going to help me. Do you see the problem? And are you beginning to see how, sorry, a little emotional. Do you see why it's so important for us? Because they're looking to us. They want help. They don't want to suffer. They want to be well. And they're looking to us to be some kind of a conduit or facilitator of that. And if they can't trust us, then what are their options? And that's why this is so important. Because it's not just a checklist. It's not just terms. It's not just bullet points. It's building trust. Letting our publics know that they can invest their bodies, their health, their welfare, their time, their rights, their money into our efforts to learn more about how we can, if we can't care for them, then how the knowledge we're gaining now will provide an opportunity for us to care for others in the future. So injury compensation research involving more than minimal risk, it's a requirement. So if the research involves more than minimal risk, you have to include information about compensation for injury. Especially important is that if there are no plans. Seriously, that may seem like it's self-evident, but we have to keep a close eye on that. If the sponsor, whether that sponsor is industry or whether that sponsor is a funding agency or whether that sponsor is the investigator, if there is no plan, if there are no plans to compensate for injury, a potential participant needs to know that. Why? Because if something goes wrong, who's on the hook? He or she is. And don't you think he or she would love the option to say, wait a minute, if this does this to me, then I'm going to have to shell out X and I don't have X, so therefore I'm not going to do this. Don't they have the right to know that? Related costs and payments. Key information. Why? Why does a potential participant, why should they know about any related costs or payments? We've already touched on this a little bit. So if you do want to plug in on this one, that's great. Can I afford this? Splendid. Yes. All right. We're on the right track on this one. Good. Okay. All right. So again, for a matter of time, to round this up, I'm going to move on. Related costs and payments, costs to insurance. The participant just needs to know, is this coming out of my pocket? Will my insurance cover it? Do I have the right insurance to cover it? These things are important in decision making. Reimbursement. So if I rack up a lodging and gasoline bill, will you all pay for that? That type of thing. We've already talked about some of the rest of these things. So that takes us through the FDA requirements. Those are the 7 topics. My question to you before we close up is, given what we've talked about so far, what else do you think needs to be included? Or have we pretty much exhausted everything? But if something else comes to your mind, would you please plug it up here? Because like I said, we're going to hold on to these. And we want to use this to inform our ongoing development of training and education. So if you have any other ideas of what other information would be helpful in the informed consent process, love to see it up there. Good. Thank you for thinking through that. I appreciate it. All right. So thank you very much. We're going to bring this into the train station here. Anything else these are some additional questions that the FDA guidance poses. This is some additional information the FDA suggests that the sponsor or the investigators or those who are conducting the informed consent process. Some of the other questions to consider and how you might interweave or integrate that information into your process as it's appropriate for the particular study or study population. By the way, if we're moving quickly, if you'd like to see these slides, again, I'm sure that we can make these slides available to you. That's not an issue. If you'd like to have more information or have that readily available to you, just want to let you know that we can make that happen. So remember, ICF is more than a document. It's information. What's the C? Communication. That promotes what? Facilitation. Excellent. Thank you very much. This last slide or two is the FDA's attempt to help investigators, to help the IRB, to help sponsors understand their expectation. That being said, we're just going to finish up by not necessarily going through the slide piece by piece, by reintroducing you to this one form, front and back, where it has bubbles. And the FDA has actually conducted research on how well people read drug labeling. So they use the research on how well people read and comprehend drug labeling, and based on that research, they came up with this model. So the FDA recommends going forward that there be key information, that the key information be formatted to enhance visual capture, which will promote comprehension. So borders, white space, bubbles, needs to be in sufficient detail. We've already concerned ourselves with, well, what's reasonable, and in this case now the question is what's sufficient. Organization, the FDA recommends that maybe there should be tiers. So maybe the very first bubble should be just a general statement. The second tier, the second bubble should be risk. And then below that are other bubbles that would factor in the other 5 or 6 elements that they've identified. And it should be in understandable language. We've already discussed understandable language. So I just invite you, what are your comments, questions about what you've heard? This is an opportunity for you to say, I would like to know more about, or I'm a little concerned about X, Y, or Z. But this slide is for you just to tag on any additional comment or question you may have about what you've seen and what you've heard here with me this morning, afternoon. Conclusions. I'll read these if that's okay. So, FDA proposed rule will require key information and efforts to facilitate understanding during informed consent process. It is a process. Key information section should have format, content, organization, and language that facilitate maximal understanding. Increasing complexity of clinical trials, time constraints, inherent risks, and other factors necessitate maximization of understanding. Recognizing and understanding key information requirements will equip and empower sponsors, investigators, research staff, institutions, and IRBs to maximize informed consent effectiveness. I thank you very much for your attention. I don't see anybody snoozing, so either you hide it well or you really were attentive. So I'm grateful for all of that, either way. The floor is open to questions or rebuttals. Time's up for rebuttals. That got a laugh. Okay, that's good. That's good. Questions about what you've seen here, what you've heard, concerns that you may have. This is an opportunity to do that here. Nikki. Nikki, the answer to that question is that I do not entirely, because when the draft guidance like this comes out, it's usually identified by departments within the FDA, so like a CBRD or something like that. So no, I do not know. Although I will say this, that in the draft guidance, it does say that the FDA does recommend that sponsors, investigators bring together patient advocacy groups to help them understand what this content would be and what the formatting would look like. So I am inferring, and it's a strict inference, but I am inferring that the FDA made those statements based on their experience of bringing together, whether they be patient advocacy groups, whether that be providers or a combination thereof, and the literature. I think there was a reference to the literature. So I don't know for a fact epistemic certainty, but I infer that based on how the guidance is written. Anybody else? Splendid. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a delight to speak with you. Thank you for engaging me through the slides, using from our purpose, but to better equip and empower you to be the most effective at your job, to bring research and ultimately greater care to our patients with the greatest care and love. Thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day.